Volume 3, Part 20 of Herodotus's Histories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Histories, Volume 3, by Herodotus of Halicarnassus. Translated by E. D. Godley, Part 20. This, then, is what happened in this battle. But Artabazus, son of Pharnaces, had from the very first disapproved of the king's leaving Mardonius, and now all his counselling not to join battle had been of no avail. In his displeasure at what Mardonius was doing, he himself did as I will show. He had with him a great army, as many as 40,000 men. He knew full well what the outcome of the battle would be, and no sooner had the Greeks and Persians met, than he led these with a fixed purpose, telling them to follow him all together wherever he should lead them, whatever they thought his intent might be. With that command he pretended to lead them into battle. As he came farther on his way, he saw the Persians already fleeing, and accordingly led his men, no longer in the same array, but took to his heels and fled with all speed, not to the wooden fort, nor to the walled city of Thebes, but to Phocis, so that he might make his way with all haste to the Hellespont. So Artabazus and his army turned out that way. All the rest of the Greeks who were on the king's side fought badly on purpose, but not so the Boeotians. They fought for a long time against the Athenians. For those Thebans who were on the Persian side had a great enthusiasm in the battle, and did not want to fight in a cowardly manner. As a result of this, 300 of their first and best were killed there by the Athenians. At last, however, the Boeotians too yielded, and they fled to Thebes, but not by the way which the Persians had fled, and the multitude of the allies which had fought no fight to the end, nor achieved any feat of arms. This flight of theirs, which took place before the actual closing of battle, and was prompted because they saw the Persians flee, proves to me that it was on the Persians that the fortune of the barbarians hung. They accordingly all fled, save the cavalry, Boeotian and other. This helped the fleeing men in so far as it remained between them and their enemies, and shielded its friends from the Greeks in their flight. So the Greeks, now having the upper hand, followed Xerxes's men, pursuing and slaying. During this steadily growing rout there came a message to the rest of the Greeks, who were by the temple of Hera and stayed out of the fighting, that there had been a battle and that Pausanias's men were victorious. When they heard this, they set forth in no ordered array, those who were with the Corinthians keeping to the spurs of the mountain and the hill country, by the road that led upward straight to the temple of Demeter, and those who were with the Megarians and Phaeacians taking the most level route over the plain. However, when the Megarians and Phaeacians had come near the enemy, the Theban horsemen, whose captain was Asopodorus son of Timander, caught sight of them approaching in haste and disorder, and rode at them. In this attack they trampled 600 of them, and pursued and drove the rest to Kithaeron. So these perished without any one noticing. But when the Persians and the rest of the multitude had fled within the wooden wall, they managed to get up on the towers before the coming of the Lacedaemonians. They then strengthened the wall as best they could. When the Athenians arrived, an intense battle for the wall began. For as long as the Athenians were not there, the barbarians defended themselves and had a great advantage over the Lacedaemonians, who had no skill in the assault of walls. When the Athenians came up, however, the fight for the wall became intense and lasted for a long time. In the end the Athenians, by valour and constant effort, scaled the wall and breached it. The Greeks poured in through the opening they had made. The first to enter were the Tegeans, and it was they who plundered the tent of Mardonius, taking from it, besides everything else, the feeding trough of his horses, which was all full of bronze, and a thing well worth looking at. The Tegeans dedicated this feeding trough of Mardonius in the temple of Athena Alea. Everything else which they took they brought into the common pool, as did the rest of the Greeks. As for the barbarians, they did not form a united body again once the wall was down, nor did any one think of defence because the terrified men in the tiny space and the many myriads herded together were in great distress. Such a slaughter were the Greeks able to make, that of 260,000 who remained after Artabazus had fled with his 40,000, scarcely 3,000 were left alive. Of the Lacedaemonians from Sparta, 91 altogether were killed in battle, of the Tegeans 17, and of the Athenians 52. Among the barbarians the best fighters were the Persian infantry and the cavalry of the Sacae, and of men, it is said, the bravest was Mardonius. Among the Greeks, the Tegeans and Athenians conducted themselves nobly, but the Lacedaemonians excelled in all valour. Of this my only clear proof is, for all those conquered the foes opposed to them, the fact that the Lacedaemonians fought with the strongest part of the army, and overcame it. According to my judgment, the bravest man by far was Aristodemus, who had been reviled and dishonoured for being the only man of the 300 that came alive from Thermopylae. Next after him in valour were Posidonius, Phalasion, and Amonpharetus. Nevertheless, when there was a general discussion about who had borne himself most bravely, those Spartans who were there judged that Aristodemus, who plainly wished to die because of the reproach hanging over him, and so rushed out and left the battle column behind, had achieved great deeds, but that Posidonius, who had no wish to die, proved himself a courageous fighter, and so in this way he was the better man. This they may have said merely out of jealousy, but all the aforesaid who were killed in that fight received honour, save Aristodemus; he, because he desired death because of the reproach previously mentioned, received none. Those won the most renown of all who fought at Plataea. For Callicrates, who, when he came to the army, was the finest not only of the Lacedaemonians, but also of all the other Greeks, died away from the battle. Callicrates, who was sitting in his place when Pausanias was offering sacrifice, was wounded in the side by an arrow. While his comrades were fighting, he was carried out of the battle and died a lingering death, saying to Ermnestes, a Plataean, that it was not a source of grief to him to die for Hellas's sake. His sorrow was rather that he had struck no blow and achieved no deed worthy of his merit, despite all his eager desire to do so. Of the Athenians, Sophanes, son of Eutychides, is said to have won renown, a man from the town of Decelea, whose people once did a deed that was of eternal value, as the Athenians themselves say. For in the past, when the sons of Tyndarus were trying to recover Helen, after breaking into Attica with a great host, they turned the towns upside down because they did not know where Helen had been hidden. Then, it is said, the Decleans, and as some say, Decelas himself, because he was angered by the pride of Theseus and feared for the whole land of Attica, revealed the whole matter to the sons of Tyndarus, and guided them to Aphidnae, which Tittacus, one of the Autochthanoi, handed over to the Tyndaridae. For that deed the Deceleans have always had and still have freedom at Sparta from all dues and chief places at feasts. In fact, even as recently as the war which was waged many years after this time, between the Athenians and Peloponnesians, the Lacedaemonians laid no hand on Decelea when they harried the rest of Attica. From that town was Sophanes, who now was the best Athenian fighter in the battle, and about him two tales are told. According to the first, he bore an iron anchor attached to the belt of his cuirass with a chain of bronze. He would cast this anchor whenever he approached his enemies in an attack, so that the enemy, as they left their ranks, might not be able to move him from his place. When they were put to flight, it was his plan that he would pull up his anchor and so pursue them. So runs this tale. The second, which contradicts with the first, and relates that he wore no iron anchor attached to his cuirass, but that his shield, which he constantly whirled around and never held still, had on it an anchor as a device. There is yet another glorious deed which Sophanes did. When the Athenians were besieging Aegina, he challenged and killed Eurybates the Argive, a victor in the 5 contests. Long after this, Sophanes met his death when he was general of the Athenians with Ligrus, son of Glaucon. He was killed at Dodus by the Edonians in a battle for the gold mines. Immediately after the Greeks had devastated the barbarians at Plataea, a woman, who was the concubine of Phrenedates a Persian, son of Tiapus, deserting from the enemy, came to them. She, learning that the Persians were ruined and the Greeks victorious, decked herself, as did also her attendants, with many gold ornaments and the fairest clothing that she had, and alighting thus from her carriage came to the Lacedaemonians while they were still in the midst of slaughtering. When she saw Pausanias, whose name and country she had often heard of, directing everything, she knew that it was he, and supplicated him, clasping his knees, "Save me, your suppliant, O King of Sparta, from captive slavery, for you have aided me till now, by making an end of those men who hold sacred nothing of the gods or any of the divinities. Coan I am by birth, the daughter of Hegetorides, son of Antigoras. In Cos the Persians seized me by force and held me prisoner." "Take heart, lady," Pausanias answered, "for you are my suppliant, and furthermore, if you are really the daughter of Hegetorides of Cos, He is my closest friend of all who dwell in those lands." For the present, he then entrusted her to those of the Ephors who were present. Later he sent her to Aegina, where she herself desired to go. Immediately after the arrival of this woman, the men of Mantinea came when everything was already over. Upon learning that they had come too late for the battle, they were extremely upset, and said that they ought to punish themselves for that. When they heard that those Medes with artabases were fleeing, they would have pursued them as far as Thessaly. The Lacedaemonians, however, would not permit them to pursue the fleeing men. So when they returned to their own land, the Mantineans banished the leaders of their army from the country. After the Mantineans came the men of Elis, who also went away extremely upset, and after their departure, they too banished their leaders. Such were the doings of the Mantineans and Elians. There was at Plataea in the army of the Achnaeans one Lampon, son of Pythias, a leading man of Aegina. He hastened to Pausanias with really outrageous counsel, and coming upon him said to him, "Son of Cleombrotus, you have done a deed of surpassing greatness and glory. The god has granted you in saving Hellas to have won greater renown than any Greek whom we know. But now you must finish what remains for the rest, so that your fame may be still greater, and so that no barbarian will hereafter begin doing reckless things against the Greeks. When Leonidas was killed at Thermopylae, Mardonius and Xerxes cut off his head and set it on a pole. Make them alike return, and you will win praise from all Spartans and the rest of Hellas besides. For if you impale Mardonius, you will be avenged for your father's brother Leonidas." This is what Lampon, thinking to please, said. Pausanias, however, answered him as follows: "Aeginetan, I thank you for your good will and forethought, but you have missed the mark of right judgment. First you exalt me and my fatherland in my deeds, yet next you cast me down to mere nothingness when you advise me to insult the dead, and say that I shall win more praise if I do so. That would be an act more proper for barbarians than for Greeks, and one that we consider worthy of censure even in barbarians. No, as for myself, I would prefer to find no favour either with the people of Aegina or any one else who is pleased by such acts. It is enough for me if I please the Spartans by righteous deeds and speech. As for Leonidas, whom you would have me avenge, I think that he has received a full measure of vengeance. The uncounted souls of these that you see have done honour to him and the rest of those who died at Thermopylae. But to you this is my warning: do not come again to me with words like these, nor give me such counsel. Be thankful now that you go unpunished." With that Lampon departed. Then Pausanias made a proclamation that no man should touch the spoils, and ordered the Helots to gather all the stuff together. They, spreading all over the camp, found tents there adorned with gold and silver, and couches gilden and silver plated, and golden bowls, and cups, and drinking vessels; and sacks they found on wagons, in which were seen cauldrons of gold and silver. They stripped from the dead who lay there their armlets and torques, and golden daggers. As for the embroidered clothing, it was disregarded. Much of all this the Helots showed, as much as they could not conceal, but much they stole and sold to the Aeginetans. As a result the Aeginetans laid the foundation of their great fortunes by buying gold from the Helots as though it were bronze. Having brought all the loot together, they set apart a tithe for the god of Delphi. From this was made and dedicated that tripod which rests upon the bronze three-headed serpent, nearest to the altar. Another they set apart for the god of Olympia, from which was made and dedicated a bronze figure of Zeus, 10 cubits high, and another for the god of the Isthmus, from which was fashioned a bronze Poseidon 7 cubits high. When they had set all this apart, they divided what remained, and each received, according to his worth, concubines of the Persians and gold and silver, and all the rest of the stuff and the beasts of burden. How much was set apart and given to those who had fought best at Plataea, no man says. I think that they also received gifts, but tenfold of every kind: women, horses, talents, camels, and all other things also, was set apart and given to Pausanias. This other story is also told. When Xerxes fled from Hellas, he left to Mardonius his own establishment. Pausanias, seeing Mardonius's establishment with its display of gold and silver and gaily coloured tapestry, ordered the bakers and the cooks to prepare a dinner such as they were accustomed to do for Mardonius. They did his bidding, but Pausanias, when he saw golden and silver couches richly covered, and tables of gold and silver, and all the magnificent service of the banquet, was amazed at the splendour before him, and for a joke commanded his own servants to prepare a dinner in Laconian fashion. When that meal, so different from the other, was ready, Pausanias burst out laughing and sent for the generals of the Greeks. When these had assembled, Pausanias pointed to the manner in which each dinner was served, and said, "Men of Hellas, I have brought you here because I desired to show you the foolishness of the leader of the Medes, who, with such provisions for life as you see, came here to take away from us our possessions which are so pitiful." In this way, it is said, Pausanias spoke to the generals of the Greeks. Long after these events many of the Plataeans also found chests full of gold and silver and other things. Moreover, when their bodies, which the Plataeans gathered into one place, were laid bare of flesh, a skull was found of which the bone was all of one piece without suture. A jawbone also came to light in which the teeth of the upper jaw were one whole, a single bone, front teeth and grinders, and one could see the body of a man of 5 cubits stature. As for the body of Mardonius, it was removed on the day after the battle, by whom I cannot with certainty say. I have, however, heard of very many countries that buried Mardonius, and I know of many that were richly rewarded for that act by Mardonius's son Artontes. Which one of them it was that stole and buried the body of Mardonius I cannot learn for certain. Some report that it was buried by Dionysiphanus, an Ephesian. Such was the manner of Mardonius's burial. But the Greeks, when they had divided the spoils at Plataea, buried each contingent of their dead in a separate place. The Lacedaemonians made 3 tombs. There they buried their Erions, among whom were Posidonius, Amphiaraus, Philocyon, and Callicrates. In one of the tombs, then, were the Erions, in the second the rest of the Spartans, and in the third the Helots. This, then, is how the Lacedaemonians buried their dead. The Tegeans, however, buried all theirs together in a place apart, and the Athenians did similarly with their own dead. So too did the Megarians and Phaeacians with those who had been killed by the horsemen. All the tombs of these peoples were filled with the dead, but as for the rest of the states whose tombs are to be seen at Plataea, their tombs are but empty burrows that they built for the sake of the men who should come after, because they were ashamed to have been absent from the battle. There is one there called the tomb of the Aeginetans, which, as I learn by inquiry, was built as late as 10 years after, at the Aeginetans' desire, by their patron and protector Cleades, son of Autodicus, a Plataean. As soon as the Greeks had buried their dead at Plataea, they resolved in council that they would march against Thebes and demand surrender of those who had taken the Persian side, particularly of Timagenetus and Antigonus, who were chief among their foremost men. If these men were not delivered to them, they would not withdraw from the area in front of the city till they had taken it. They came with this purpose on the 11th day after the battle and laid siege to the Thebans, demanding the surrender of the men. When the Thebans refused this surrender, they laid waste to their lands and assaulted the walls. Seeing that the Greeks would not cease from their harrying, and 19 days had passed, Timagenetus spoke as follows to the Thebans: "Men of Thebes, since the Greeks have resolved that they will not raise the siege till Thebes is taken or we are delivered to them, do not let the land of Boeotia increase the measure of its ills for our sake. No, rather, if it is money they desire, and their demand for surrender is but a pretext, let us give them money out of our common treasury, for it was by the common will and not ours alone that we took the Persian side. If, however, they are besieging the town for no other reason than to have us, then we will give ourselves up to be tried by them." This seemed to be said well and at the right time, and the Thebans immediately sent a herald to Pausanias, offering to surrender the men. On these terms they made an agreement, but Antigonus escaped from the town. His sons were seized, but Pausanias held them free of guilt, saying that the sons were not an accessory to the treason. As for the rest of the men whom the Thebans surrendered, they supposed that they would be put on trial, and were confident that they would defeat the impeachment by bribery. Pausanias, however, had that very suspicion of them, and when they were put into his hands he sent away the whole allied army and carried the men to Corinth, where he put them to death. This is what happened at Plataea and Thebes. End of Volume 3, Part 20.